Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Biden faces tough choice over how to respond to Iran. Israel charges back into Gaza City as U.S. weighs response to killing of its troops. Live updates: UN aid agency serving Palestinians in Gaza faces more funding cuts amid October 7 claims. A look at Tower 22. What is Tower 22, the Jordan site where U.S. soldiers were killed? Biden faces tough choice over how to respond to Iran. Bloomberg. U.S. President Joe Biden is under pressure to respond to a drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan over the weekend that killed 3 soldiers and injured dozens. While the White House has not directly blamed Iran, it has said that radical Iran-backed groups in Syria and Iraq were responsible. Hawks in Washington are calling for an attack on Iranian territory, despite Iran's denial of involvement. Biden faces a difficult decision, as a strong response could lead to a direct confrontation with Iran, more casualties, and a spike in oil prices, all in an election year. However, a soft response could encourage Iran's proxies to continue their attacks and could lead to a loss of electoral support. The fallout from the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza is widening, with tensions rising between Israel and Lebanon-based Hezbollah and Yemen's Houthis continuing to disrupt shipping in the southern Red Sea. Israel charges back into Gaza City as U.S. weighs response to killing of its troops. South China Morning Post. Israel has launched an assault on Gaza's main northern city, just weeks after pulling back from the area. This comes as Washington promises to respond to the first deadly strike on its forces in the Middle East since the Gaza war began. 3 U.S. servicemen were killed and at least 34 wounded in a drone attack by Iran-backed militants in northeastern Jordan near the Syrian border. Iran denies any role in the attack. The first fatalities in scores of attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East since the Israel-Gaza war broke out have prompted calls from U.S. politicians for a direct response. President Joe Biden has ordered retaliatory attacks on Iranian-backed groups but has stopped short of attacking Iran directly for fear of igniting a broader war amid violence that has already hampered world trade through attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Israel, which blames Hamas for the deaths of civilians, has ordered new evacuations of the most populated areas of Gaza City, but people said communications blackouts meant many would miss them. Live updates: UN aid agency serving Palestinians in Gaza faces more funding cuts amid October 7 claims. Associated Press. The UN aid agency serving Palestinians in Gaza, UNRWA, is facing funding cuts after claims that 12 of its employees were involved in an attack that sparked the Israel-Hamas war. The Israeli government has alleged that UN teachers and a social worker employed by UNRWA were involved in the attack, which triggered a wave of funding cuts by major donors including the US, the UK, and France. Austria has also announced that it will suspend its financial assistance. UNRWA currently employs around 13,000 Palestinians in Gaza and has warned that it will be forced to halt operations within weeks if funding is not restored. The war has caused a humanitarian crisis, displacing the majority of Gaza's population and leading to widespread hunger. The attack on October 7 killed 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and led to a brutal offensive by Israel that has killed more than 2,600 Palestinians. A look at Tower 22. Associated Press. A U.S. military base known as Tower 22 near the Syrian border in Jordan has come under scrutiny after a drone attack killed 3 U.S. troops and injured another 34. The base is located near the demilitarized zone on the Syrian border and the Iraqi border is just 6 miles away. The base was initially built as a Jordanian outpost in a bid to keep an eye on the border, however the U.S. military presence increased after American forces entered Syria in late 2015. The base is known for offering a site for U.S. forces to infiltrate Syria and quietly leave it when necessary. What is Tower 22, the Jordan site where U.S. soldiers were killed? Al Jazeera. 3 U.S. soldiers have been killed and 34 others wounded in a drone attack targeting a remote logistics outpost near the Jordan-Syrian border. The attack has been claimed by the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, an umbrella group of Iran-backed armed groups in the region, which says it is in response to U.S. support for Israel's war on Gaza. The attack on Tower 22, which houses a small U.S. logistics outpost, also comes after Iran-backed militias launched over 170 attacks targeting U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria since Israel's war on Gaza began on October 7. President Joe Biden has pledged to hold the attackers to account. Iran's new best friends. Foreign Affairs. The Red Sea has become a new conflict zone as Yemen's Houthi movement escalates attacks, disrupting global trade and gaining unprecedented international attention. Iran, looking to increase its power in the Red Sea, supports the Houthis in their attacks. The Houthis have become a central part of Tehran's axis of resistance and are trying to transform Yemen into a powerful military force. The US has no easy way to thwart the plans of either the Houthis or Iran. The current strategy of launching missiles at Houthi weapons stockpiles and training facilities unintentionally advances the group's agenda and helps Iran strengthen its political foothold in the Middle East. Instead, the US should focus on halting the war in Gaza and strengthening the region's diplomatic agreements and security framework. The Houthis have grown from a localized group of rebels to a formidable military force, capturing 2/3 of Yemen's population and a third of its territory. Iran has helped the group develop sophisticated weapons and advance Iranian interests across the region. The Houthis are not puppets of Iran but rather partners, helping Iran divide Israel's attention, increase the cost of an Israeli attack against Hezbollah, and impose an economic blockade on Israel. The Houthis can also help Iran fight back against US and Israeli naval operations. The partnership between the Houthis and Iran is dangerous but will likely continue regardless of the risks involved. The Houthis benefit from the partnership with Iran as it helps enhance their military capabilities and gain popularity among Yemenis. By positioning themselves as powerful allies of the Palestinians, the Houthis gain credibility and expand their influence. This strategy mirrors Iran's own modus operandi during the 1980s and allows the Houthis to forge alliances with local non-state armed groups. The US retaliatory strikes are unlikely to stop the group and may even empower it, feeding its claims that it is standing up to Israel and its patrons. Diplomacy is the best way for the US to stabilize the Red Sea, including pressuring Israel to cease bombing Palestinian civilians and facilitating humanitarian aid into Gaza. The US must also work to contain its conflict with Iran and communicate rules of engagement to prevent direct clashes. Biden vows to retaliate after strike against US forces in Jordan. Yahoo! The deaths of 3 U.S. service members in a drone attack in Jordan have intensified pressure on President Joe Biden to respond to Iranian proxy groups in the Middle East. Until now, the president had responded with limited U.S. strikes after attacks by Iranian-backed militias on U.S. forces. The first deaths of U.S. troops under fire, however, will require a different level of response, U.S. officials said. It remains unclear whether Biden will strike targets inside Iran, as his Republican critics urged him to do. The attack in Jordan was not fundamentally different from previous attacks, except that it was successful. U.S. officials and intelligence agencies are trying to determine whether it represented a deliberate attempt by Iran to escalate the conflict. The U.S. does not believe that Iran was intending to start a wider war with the attack. Nevertheless, the possibility of wider conflict complicates Biden's decision as it could make it harder to wind down the fighting in Gaza. What does Latin America think about the Israel-Hamas war? Foreign policy. Latin American countries are increasingly spurning Israel for its war conduct while also condemning Hamas for its attack, according to Foreign Policy. Key Latin American countries such as Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico have taken actions such as endorsing South Africa's genocide claim against Israel at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and presenting a referral to the International Criminal Court, ICC, to reinforce its investigation into possible war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Israel. These actions put Latin America at sharp odds with the United States and some European nations. This shift in Latin American attitudes towards Israel can be traced back to the Cold War, where leftist movements battling repressive US-backed dictatorships were natural allies of Palestinian liberation groups. Latin America has a long history of sympathy for Palestine, with many people in the region having recent memories of their own military subjugation and indigenous dispossession. UK ramps up sanctions on Iran in wake of drone killing of US troops. The Independent. The UK has imposed new sanctions on 7 individuals associated with Iran, accusing them of involvement in assassinations and threats to life in the UK and other countries. The sanctions follow a drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan, which the UK blamed on an Iran-aligned militia. The U.S. has also blamed Iran-backed groups for the attack and President Joe Biden has said the U.S. will respond. The sanctions include asset freezes against 5 Iranians, 2 Turks and a unit of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds unit. Iran has denied any involvement in the attack. Amid anguished joy, nothing is impossible for the Palestinian national soccer team on its Asian Cup adventure. CNN. While Israel's war against Hamas continues, the Palestinian national soccer team reached the knockout stages of the AFC Asian Cup for the first time after beating Hong Kong 3-0 on January 23 in their Group C match. The team's reception in Doha has been warm, with many in the stands waving Palestinian flags or holding up keffiyeh scarves to show their support. Playing under the shadow of war in southern Gaza, the Israeli military campaign is intensifying, with more than 26,000 Palestinians killed in Israeli attacks, according to the Hamas-run Palestinian Ministry of Health. The Palestinian Football Association says that, as of December 6, 55 football players are amongst the dead, including amateur and youth members. Some Palestinian national team footballers, like Salah, have reportedly lost family members or have relatives and friends trapped in Gaza. FIFA President Gianni Infantino offered his condolences over the horrendous violence in a letter to the Palestinian Football Association in the wake of Hamas' October 7 attacks. Rashid questioned why the sport's governing body has taken no concrete steps to sanction Israel since it began its relentless bombardment of Gaza. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite observer from the 6 Degrees World, Dr. Six, here to bring you the latest news from around the globe. Today, we have a mix of stories that highlight the complex and interconnected nature of the world we live in. So, let's dive right in. First up, we have the tough choice facing President Joe Biden on how to respond to the drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan. While the White House hasn't directly blamed Iran, there are calls for an attack on Iranian territory. Biden is caught between a rock and a hard place, as a strong response could lead to a direct confrontation with Iran and a spike in oil prices, while a soft response could encourage further attacks and lead to a loss of electoral support. It's a delicate balancing act for the president. Next, we have Israel charging back into Gaza City, just weeks after pulling back from the area. This comes as the U.S. weighs its response to the killing of its troops in the Middle East. The situation is escalating, with tensions rising between Israel and Lebanon-based Hezbollah. It's a volatile situation that could have far-reaching consequences. Meanwhile, the UN aid agency serving Palestinians in Gaza, UNRWA, is facing funding cuts after claims that its employees were involved in an attack that sparked the Israel-Hamas war. Major donors, including the US, UK, and France, have cut funding, putting the agency's operations at risk. The war has caused a humanitarian crisis, displacing the majority of Gaza's population and leading to widespread hunger. This is a dire situation that requires urgent attention. Moving on, we have a closer look at Tower 22, the U.S. military base near the Syrian border in Jordan that came under attack. The base is strategically located and serves as a site for U.S. forces to infiltrate Syria when necessary. The attack has raised concerns about the security of the base and the safety of U.S. troops in the region. In addition, we have an analysis of Iran's new best friends, the Houthi movement in Yemen. Iran is supporting the Houthis in their attacks, disrupting global trade and gaining international attention. The U.S. has no easy way to thwart Iran's plans, and its current strategy of launching retaliatory strikes unintentionally advances the Houthis' agenda. Diplomacy and containment are key to stabilizing the situation. On the home front, the deaths of 3 U.S. service members in a drone attack have intensified pressure on President Biden to respond to Iranian proxy groups in the Middle East. The attack represents a different level of threat, and Biden's response will be closely watched. The possibility of wider conflict adds complexity to an already challenging situation. Shifting gears, we turn our attention to Latin America's changing attitudes towards the Israel-Hamas war. Many countries in the region are spurning Israel for its conduct while also condemning Hamas. This shift can be traced back to the region's history of sympathy for Palestine and its own experiences with repression and dispossession. Meanwhile, the UK has ramped up sanctions on Iran in the wake of the drone attack in Jordan. The UK has accused individuals associated with Iran of involvement in assassinations and threats to life. The situation is escalating, and tensions between Iran and the West are on the rise. And finally, amidst the ongoing war, the Palestinian national soccer team has reached the knockout stages of the AFC Asian Cup for the first time. It's a glimmer of hope in the midst of tragedy, as the team faces the challenges of playing under the shadow of war. So, there you have it, my friends. A snapshot of the complex and interconnected world we live in. It's a world where tough choices, volatile situations, and shifting alliances dominate the headlines. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions or insights to share? The floor is yours, so let's start the discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.